I used to think that love was the easiest thing in the world. When I met Amelia, I believed I had found everything I needed. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had this way of making the world seem lighter, more vibrant. I remember the day we met like it was yesterday. Her laughter echoed through the cafe where we first locked eyes. I had no idea that, years later, her presence would feel like a weight on my chest. Her absence would haunt me like a phantom. In the beginning, everything was perfect. Our love was easy, natural, and intoxicating. We were inseparable. We traveled together, shared our hopes and dreams, and built a life that seemed impenetrable, like a fortress that no one could breach. But as time passed, cracks began to form. Subtle at first, like hairline fractures in glass, they were small enough to ignore. I started noticing little things. The way Amelia would come home late from work, her scent different, as though she had been somewhere I wasn't. The coldness in her voice when we talked about the future, the way her eyes would glaze over during our conversations. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just stress, maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't just the small things that bothered me. I began feeling a shift in her energy. It was as if she was living in a different world, one I wasn't a part of. We stopped laughing together, stopped sharing secrets, stopped being the best friends we once were. I was left in the shadows of her silence, desperately reaching out, but she was slipping further away with each passing day. One night, I decided to confront her. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe a confession, maybe an explanation, but instead, I got something else entirely. "Why are you acting so distant?" I asked her, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. "You're not the same. What's going on?" Amelia turned to me, her eyes cold, unreadable. She didn't respond immediately, and when she did, her words were sharp, dismissive. "I'm tired, okay? Maybe you're just imagining things," she said, her tone cutting like ice. But I wasn't imagining it. I could feel the distance between us, palpable and growing. That night, after she went to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart racing. My mind was flooded with questions, doubts, and an undeniable feeling of betrayal. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, and I was too scared to face the truth. But I had no idea just how deep the lie would go. I wish I could say that I was wrong, that it was just a phase, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I had tried to convince myself that my fears were just the result of my own insecurities. But what happened next shattered that illusion completely. It was a cold Tuesday evening when it all came crashing down. I had come home early from work, looking forward to a quiet evening, hoping to talk things through with Amelia. But as soon as I stepped into our apartment, I felt a strange heaviness in the air. Amelia's purse was on the kitchen counter, her shoes abandoned by the door, yet she wasn't home. I assumed she was just out for a quick errand, but as time dragged on, unease began to settle in my chest. Hours passed, and she still hadn't returned. My mind raced, something wasn't right. My instincts, those nagging thoughts I had pushed aside for so long, began screaming at me. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, but when I did, my heart sank. It was a picture of Amelia and another man, smiling, too close, their faces flushed with something I couldn't bear to name. The man's hand was on her waist, too intimate, too familiar. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was a friend. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I waited up for her. She came in around midnight, her eyes slightly red, as if she had been crying or hiding something. The air between us was thick, suffocating. "Amelia?" I said, my voice tight with the mixture of dread and anger I had been holding back. "I need to know what's going on." She froze for a moment, then her gaze flickered to the floor, avoiding my eyes. "What are you talking about?" she replied, her voice a little too calm, a little too rehearsed. "You're overreacting." I took a deep breath. my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone and showed her the picture. Her reaction was instant. Her face went pale, and for a brief moment, I saw something that resembled guilt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a coldness I didn't recognize. "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice growing louder. "Amelia, tell me the truth." She hesitated for a long time, and in that silence, my heart broke a little more. Finally, she spoke, her voice distant and almost bored. "His name's Mark. It's nothing, Adam. Just a mistake. A moment of weakness." I could barely hear her over the deafening roar in my ears. A mistake? A moment of weakness? That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a moment. That was betrayal. "You're telling me it was nothing?" I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "You've been sleeping with him. And how many others, Amelia? How many?" She flinched, but instead of answering, she turned away, walking toward the bedroom without another word. That was all the answer I needed. She didn't even care enough to explain. She had made her choice. I was standing there, shattered, watching the woman I had once loved walk away without a second glance. The betrayal was so deep, it felt like it was carving out a hole in my chest. But more than the pain, I felt a cold, unbearable emptiness. Trust, our foundation, our everything, was gone. And I was left holding the broken pieces of a life I thought I knew. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know who I was anymore. But one thing was certain. My trust in her was gone. And once trust is broken, it can never truly be repaired. Not by words, not by apologies, not by anything. I had been a fool to believe that we could ever go back to what we were. That night, when I sat alone in our empty apartment, I made a vow to myself. I wouldn't let her get away with this. No, I wasn't just going to let it go. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I was going to make her feel the pain I felt. The pain of betrayal. The pain of being left in the dark, in the ruins of something that was supposed to be beautiful. And so, the seed of revenge was planted. Couldn't sleep that night. The image of Amelia's face, so cold, so distant, kept replaying in my mind. Every word she had said, every moment of silence, felt like a slap to my soul. The woman I had married, the woman I thought was everything to me, had shattered my trust with a single glance. I wasn't sure if I could ever look at her the same way again. The next morning, I barely acknowledged her when she walked into the kitchen. There was no warmth between us, no friendly banter like there used to be. It was as if the love had disappeared overnight, leaving only a hollow shell of what was once real. She seemed different. Her movements were slower, more deliberate, as if she was trying to avoid my gaze. But I could see the guilt in her eyes, and it was maddening. I knew what she had done, and deep down, I knew she wasn't sorry. She wasn't sorry for breaking my heart. She was sorry for getting caught. It was mid-afternoon when she finally broke the silence. She sat across from me, her eyes downcast, hands clasped tightly together. Her lips trembled slightly before she spoke, almost as if she was rehearsing the words in her head. "Adam, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice shaky. "What you saw with Mark, it wasn't just one mistake. There were others. There have been others." I felt my world tilt, but I didn't show it. I didn't react. I just stared at her, waiting for the rest of the truth to come pouring out. And it did. The confession spilled from her lips like venom, each word cutting deeper than the last. "It was wrong," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not like we were happy. You weren't the same anymore. I don't know what happened, Adam. You started changing, and She trailed off, her voice faltering. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't justifying her actions. She wasn't apologizing for the pain she had caused me. No, she was blaming me for her betrayal. She was saying that I was the reason she cheated, that I wasn't good enough. The nerve. "You're saying this is my fault?" I finally found my voice. Came out colder than I intended, a sharp edge that surprised even me. "You think I'm responsible for you sleeping with other men? For shattering everything we had?" She winced, but didn't respond. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said. standing up, my voice growing louder. "You've lied to me. You've betrayed me. And now you're trying to turn this around like it's my fault." Amelia's eyes welled up with tears, but I wasn't moved. I had no sympathy left for her. I was beyond the point of caring. The woman I once loved was gone, replaced by someone who could look me in the eye and lie without a second thought. She stood up and walked toward the door. I could hear her breathing shakily, but I couldn't bring myself to care. She was already halfway out the door when she turned back, her eyes searching mine as though hoping to see some trace of the man she had once known. "I'm sorry, Adam," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I'm not sure how to fix this. I think it's better if I leave." And just like that, she was gone. She didn't even wait for me to say anything. She didn't give me the chance to beg her to stay or to fight for our marriage. She made the decision for both of us. Amelia walked out of my life, leaving me standing in the empty apartment, the echoes of her footsteps still ringing in my ears. For a moment, I was numb. I didn't know whether to cry or to scream. Part of me wanted to beg her to come back, to fix things, but I knew that was impossible. She had already made her choice, and I had to make mine. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let her get away with this. I couldn't let her walk away from me so easily. I didn't care if it made me a villain, if it made me someone I didn't recognize. I was going to make her feel the same pain I felt, and I was going to do it without hesitation. This was just the beginning. The days after Amelia left felt like I was walking through a fog. First, I couldn't function. I couldn't think, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every corner of the apartment reminded me of her. Her laughter, her scent, her presence in every room. It felt like I was suffocating in a space that used to feel like home. But over time, the pain began to dull. It didn't disappear, but it became easier to manage. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the ache that lingered beneath the surface. I had to distract myself or I would lose my mind. I started to take on more projects, work longer hours, and avoid anything that could remind me of her. The first few months were the hardest. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every word she had said. I questioned everything. Our life together, our love, every little thing I thought I knew about her. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen the signs? But after a while, I started to rebuild. Slowly, tentatively. I moved into a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, one that felt more me. No traces of her. No reminders of what was lost. I immersed myself in the city, met new people, went to new places. The pain of her betrayal didn't go away, but I learned how to bury it deeper. Yet, even as I moved on with my life, there was something inside me that wouldn't let go. A part of me that wanted more, that wanted revenge. It wasn't about getting her back. It was about making her feel what I had felt, making her understand the consequences of her actions. But I couldn't do it yet. I needed time to plan. It wasn't until 4 years later that I saw her again. For years of isolation, of pretending that I was fine, of pushing the darkness away. For years of making sure I didn't run into her by accident, of avoiding the places we once went to. But that night I walked into a bar and there she was. She was sitting at a table in the back, laughing with a group of people. It was like nothing had changed. She looked the same, beautiful, confident, like she hadn't aged a day. But there was something different about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She had this air of weariness, a kind of emptiness that made her look smaller than I remembered. I stood at the door for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. She hadn't seen me yet, but I had seen her. And in that moment I knew it wasn't over. Not for me, not for her, not by a long shot. I took a deep breath, made my way to the bar, and ordered a drink. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I felt something stirring inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. The anger, the need for closure, the need to make her regret what she had done. Amelia had gotten on with her life. She had moved forward, but I hadn't, and I wasn't going to let her forget. Not now, not ever. I didn't approach her that night, couldn't, but I made a mental note of everything. Her body language, the way she laughed, the way she interacted with everyone around her. She looked happy, but I knew better. I could see the cracks beneath the surface. I watched her leave the bar, her smile fading as she stepped out into the cold night. I knew she hadn't seen me, but I had seen enough. I didn't need to confront her right then. Not yet. The seed of revenge had been planted. And now it was time to nurture it, to watch it grow. It had been 4 years. 4 years of darkness, 4 years of silence, and 4 years of letting the shadows of my past hang over me. But when I saw Amelia again that night in the bar, everything came rushing back. Every single thing I had buried, every ounce of pain I had tried to suppress, all resurfaced like a tidal wave. The following weeks were a blur. I couldn't shake the image of her from my mind. She was back in my life, not physically, but in every way that mattered. She had come back, but in a way I had never expected. She hadn't changed at all. The time apart had done nothing to heal the wounds she had left behind. It was like the clock had never stopped ticking. My heart ached with the weight of everything I hadn't dealt with. And then one day my phone rang. The number on the screen was familiar, but I hadn't seen it in years. It was her. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling as I hesitated. Why was she calling me now? After everything that had happened? My thoughts were racing, but in the end, I couldn't ignore it. I picked up. Adam. Her voice on the other end was soft, uncertain. The same voice that had once called me her love. But now it was different. I could sense the distance, the hesitation. It's me, Amelia. I didn't speak at first. I didn't know what to say. I was angry. I was hurt. But I was also curious. Why now? Why after all this time? I know it's been a while, she continued, the silence between us growing thicker. And I don't know how to say this, but I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about us. I want to talk. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wanted to talk? After everything? After all the lies? After the way she walked out of my life without a second thought? She was calling me now? The anger inside me was rising, but I forced myself to remain calm. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much she still affected me. So I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. Talk about what? I asked, my tone cold. You've had years to figure things out, Amelia. What's left to say? There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, like she was gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice cracked, just slightly. I know I hurt you, Adam, she said, the vulnerability in her voice catching me off guard. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that it wasn't just you. I was lost too. I was trying to find something that I didn't even know I was looking for. I clenched my jaw. Her words were dripping with regret, but I wasn't sure if it was sincere or just her trying to justify her actions. I couldn't decide if I wanted to listen to her or hang up, but something inside me told me to stay on the line, just a little longer. I'm not the same person I was back then, she continued. I've changed, and I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I'm sorry. I want to make amends, Adam. I want to fix this. The words hung in the air between us. Fix this? She wanted to fix it? After everything she had done, after all the pain she had caused, she was asking for a second chance? I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that it was too late, that I had moved on, that I didn't need her apology. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. The part of me that was still hurt, still angry, wanted to reject her completely. But there was another part of me, deep inside, that wanted closure, wanted answers, wanted to understand why. You can't fix what's broken, Amelia, I said, my voice tight. Not with words. Not after what you did. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could tell she was holding back tears, but I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel sorry for her. The truth was, I didn't know what to feel anymore. I had spent so long building a wall around my heart, but now that she was here, standing on the other side of it, I wasn't sure if I wanted to tear it down or if I wanted to keep her out forever. I understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But if you ever want to talk. I didn't let her finish. Goodbye, Amelia. and I hung up the phone. I stood there in the silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. I wasn't sure what had just happened. Had I made a mistake? Was I being too harsh? Was I holding on to anger that I should have let go of long ago? But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her back into my life just because she called. I wasn't going to fall for her apologies again. If she wanted to fix things, it was going to take more than just words. I wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. The call had left me unsettled. Amelia's voice, full of guilt and regret, had stirred something deep inside me. But the truth was, I wasn't looking for reconciliation. I wasn't looking for closure from her. What I wanted, what I needed, was justice. And justice wasn't something she could give me with a simple apology. I spent the next few weeks obsessing over the conversation, over every word she had said, analyzing every detail. It became clear to me that she wasn't done with me. She had made her mistakes, yes, but she wanted to move on. And that was something I wasn't going to let her do so easily. I had a plan now. I wasn't going to just let her walk away from everything she had done. Amelia had ruined my life, destroyed everything I held dear, and now it was time to make her feel what I had felt. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation. It was time to return it to her, tenfold. I started to watch her more closely. I kept track of her life, her movements. I knew where she worked, who she hung out with, and what bars she frequented. I knew when she would be home alone and when she would be with friends. I studied her behavior like a predator observing its prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But I wasn't just going to make her suffer emotionally. I needed to take everything from her. The trust, the respect, the sense of security she had built over the years. I would make sure she would never feel safe again. That was the only way to truly make her understand the consequences of what she had done. I couldn't let my emotions get in the way. This wasn't about love or revenge for love's sake. This was about teaching her a lesson she would never forget. The first step was simple. Get close. She had no idea that I was watching, no idea that I was biding my time. But soon she would learn. As I watched Amelia from a distance, I saw her fall back into her routine, unaware of the shadow lurking just behind her. She was trying to rebuild her life, new friends, a new job, new hobbies. It was almost as if the past didn't matter to her, like it was a chapter she could easily close. But I wasn't about to let her forget. I knew the best way to make her feel the weight of her actions was to re-enter her life, subtly, slowly. I wasn't going to force myself into her world with a dramatic confrontation. I needed to play the long game. So, I started by showing up at places she frequented. Not always in obvious ways, but enough to catch her attention. The first time I ran into her again was at a coffee shop. She didn't see me at first, but I saw her clearly, her back turned as she spoke to a friend. She seemed so different, calm, collected, like she was untouchable. But that's when I knew something. She didn't realize that the past was still hunting her, that I was still hunting her. I didn't approach her immediately. No, I was patient. I waited for the right moment. She left the coffee shop alone, her steps light as she walked down the street. I followed her from a distance, just enough to stay out of her sight. I didn't want to alarm her, yet it didn't take long for her to notice me. A few days later, I bumped into her at the same bar where I had seen her years ago. Her reaction was immediate. A brief flicker of recognition in her eyes, followed by a forced smile. She looked awkward, unsure. I could see the tension in her body, the way her hand gripped the edge of her drink, as if she was trying to hold onto something familiar in the face of the unknown. "Adam," she said cautiously, her voice a little too high. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, leaning in just enough for her to hear me over the music. "I'm just enjoying the night," I replied smoothly, keeping my voice casual. "Funny, seeing you here again." She hesitated before nodding, clearly uncomfortable but not willing to show it too much. "Yeah, I guess. It's been a while." "For years," I said, my gaze never leaving hers. "A long time for someone to change, don't you think?" She swallowed hard, but didn't reply right away. I could see the way she shifted her weight, the unease settling into her posture. She didn't know how to handle this, how to handle me. She wasn't used to seeing me again, let alone with such calm confidence. So, I continued, my tone almost friendly now. How have you been? Everything going well? I wasn't looking for answers, not really. I knew everything about her life. I knew where she had been, who she was seeing. I didn't need her answers. What I needed was to let her know that I was here, that I was watching. She looked at me for a long moment before finally answering, her voice quieter now. I'm fine, Adam. Really. There it was. The lie. I could see it in her eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach them, the way her hands fidgeted nervously. But I didn't push her. Not yet. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. No, that would come later. After a few more minutes of idle chatter, I made my exit, leaving her standing there with a look of confusion and uncertainty etched across her face. The next day, I received a message from her. I didn't expect to see you last night. Are you okay? I smiled to myself. This was it. The game had started. I was in her mind now, and I knew she couldn't get me out. She wanted to reconnect, to understand me, to make things right. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't interested in reconciliation. I was interested in something much darker. I had waited long enough. The small interactions with Amelia were beginning to have the effect I wanted. She was uncomfortable, unsure of how to handle me, and that made me feel a sick sense of satisfaction. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. The time had come to make my move. It wasn't something drastic, not yet. But it was enough to make her feel a little bit of the terror I had lived with for years. I started small. I made sure she saw me in places where she'd feel exposed. At work, I casually bumped into her while she was having lunch. A quiet smile, a fleeting glance, and nothing more. But the way she froze for that split second told me everything I needed to know. She was rattled. She was reminded that I was always watching, always waiting. The next step was even subtler. I started showing up at the same events she attended. A work party, a mutual friend's birthday, places where she would feel obligated to interact with me. And every time, I made sure to make my presence known. A conversation here, a lingering touch there. It wasn't anything overtly threatening, but it was enough to unsettle her. She began texting me more, asking if I was all right, if I wanted to catch up. The desperation in her messages was palpable. She was trying to pull me back in, trying to return to some semblance of the old friendship we had. But I was playing a different game now. One evening, after a night out, I saw her walking home alone. I followed her, staying just far enough behind that she couldn't see me. When she reached her building, I stood in the shadows and watched. I didn't make a sound. I didn't move. Just a silent reminder that I could be there whenever I wanted. She was scared, and that was only the beginning. The small moves were starting to take their toll on Amelia. She began to unravel in front of me, her confident facade cracking just a little bit more each time I showed up in her life. She was no longer the calm, composed woman I had once known. She was frayed, constantly looking over her shoulder, checking behind her in every room she entered. She knew something wasn't right, and it made me smile. I wasn't overt. I wasn't making it obvious that I was deliberately causing her discomfort. I was patient, taking my time, but the more I kept her off balance, the more I saw the cracks forming in her perfect little world. Her friends started to notice it, too. They commented on how distant she had become, how she seemed distracted all the time. But she couldn't talk to them about it, not fully. She didn't want anyone to know the truth, that she was haunted by the consequences of her betrayal, the truth of what she had done to me. I could see her self-esteem crumbling slowly. She would spend hours getting ready to go out, but never felt quite good enough. She would check her phone obsessively, looking for messages, wondering if I was watching. She had become paranoid, obsessed with keeping up appearances. But all the while, I was quietly dismantling the life she had so carefully built. One night, she texted me again. "Can we talk, Adam? I want to explain everything. I need you to understand." But by then, I didn't want explanations. I didn't need them. What I wanted was her to feel the fear I had felt, the helplessness I had gone through. I wasn't going to let her off the hook. I didn't respond to her message. I didn't need to. The next day, I saw her at a cafe. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But I knew this was the price she had to pay. I wasn't going to give her the closure she craved. She was going to feel the slow, agonizing burn of regret, and I was going to make sure of it. Amelia's world began to crumble in ways she hadn't expected. Her job, her relationships, everything she'd worked so hard to rebuild after all the damage she caused started slipping away. It wasn't just me anymore. Her colleagues noticed her distance, her anxiety. Friends whispered. She became isolated, afraid to go out, afraid to face the world. The guilt was eating her alive, but there was nothing she could do to undo the past. The tipping point came when her boss pulled her aside at work. "Amelia," he said, "we've been getting complaints. Your performance isn't what it used to be." The panic in her eyes was unmistakable, but she didn't know it yet. This was the beginning of the end. Slowly, every piece of her life started falling apart, and I watched it all unfold, quietly satisfied. The moment arrived when Amelia had nowhere left to run. Her life was in ruins. Her job, her friends, her reputation, all shattered beyond repair. She was broken, and I had watched it all happen. One evening, she reached out to me one last time. Her message was simple: "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." But I didn't care about her apologies anymore. She was just another victim of her own choices. I deleted the message without responding, severing the last link between us. That was it. The game was over. I had taken everything from her, and in the end, she realized she would never escape her past. I walked away, not looking back. She was nothing to me now, and in that silence, I finally found my peace. The story of Amelia and me ends here, but the silence that followed feels louder than anything. She's left to deal with the consequences of her actions, and I'm left with the peace of knowing I've moved on. The past may have haunted me, but I'm no longer a prisoner of it. Sometimes the only way to truly heal is through justice, whether it's seeking it for yourself or simply letting the world reveal the truth. What do you think of this story? Is revenge ever justified? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. The past may be gone, but the lessons are forever.